Hey everybody, Matthew Coller here from Purple Insider from Paul Brown Stadium, and a crazy game between the Minnesota Vikings and the Cincinnati Bengals, 27-24. It ends with a tremendous throw from Joe Burrow, setting up a game-winning field goal in overtime. And if we go in reverse, this game ends with a great play by the Bengals quarterback to finish off a game that was hideous, ugly, wild, out of control at times between the Bengals and the Vikings. Maybe you could say it was a classic week one matchup because the teams are playing for the first time. We don't see starting offenses playing a whole lot in preseason like they used to, and what you end up with is penalties and mistakes and sometimes big plays, and we saw all of those things today. So if we count backwards, you have the game-winning field goal and drive from the Bengals, sparked by a 4th-and-1 play where Joe Burrow did not QB sneak. The Vikings were all up waiting for him to QB sneak, throws to an open receiver. They set up the win. Before that is a Dalvin Cook fumble, which is highly debatable. On the TV broadcast, it looked like he may have been down before he let the ball go, but that ultimately opens the door for the Cincinnati Bengals to win the game. But the Vikings also had another drive in overtime where they did not succeed, and so did Cincinnati, where it seemed like Cincinnati in the second half of the game became so ultra-conservative that they were leaving the door open over and over for the Vikings to win this game. Cincinnati went 3 for 14 on third downs, despite the fact that their quarterback played very, very well in this game and went 20 for 28, but yet they could not convert consistently on third downs, which left the door open for the Vikings. Now, go in reverse order to a bizarre decision by Zach Taylor in the third quarter to go for it on fourth down inside of Bengal territory, up 24-14, and the Vikings take advantage. They get back in the game, and they score a touchdown on a great pass from Kirk Cousins to Adam Thielen that brings the Vikings within shouting distance. They ultimately get a terrific drive by Kirk Cousins to tie the game, which he completed a 4th-and-4 pass to KJ Osborne. Before that, there was a very nice throw to Tyler Conklin, who came up big, and then Greg Joseph puts down a 53-yard field goal twice because he was iced to give them a chance to potentially win the game in overtime, and they make the big mistake that causes them not to. But as we continue to go backwards through this game, the Vikings made their own bed with this one, because right off of the bat in the first quarter, they set themselves up with numerous penalties. In fact, 3 penalties on the first drive of the game, and then there were multiple holding penalties. I believe 4 holding penalties in the first half, and one of them also might have been declined at one point too. They also had a huge pass interference by Bashaud Breeland that set up the Cincinnati touchdown on their first touchdown of the game. And then the Vikings make another mistake at the end of the half. They don't move the football. They punt it away. Joe Burrow hits a big pass to Jamar Chase for a touchdown that gave Cincinnati 2 touchdowns on the day. And at that point, the Vikings are down in the game and already having to come back from 2 touchdowns. And this game reminded me a lot of last year, where the Vikings often were playing from behind. They didn't get off to hot starts offensively. They would get down a couple of scores, find their way back, and then have a chance at the end in sort of coin flip situations, some in which they won against Carolina, some that they lost last year against Dallas and Chicago. Well, this one turned out like Dallas and Chicago, where they just did not come through at the end of the game because of one key mistake, the fumble by Dalvin Cook. But there were many other things that went into this one. The concerns coming out of training camp were that the Vikings offense didn't seem to be so much on the same page, and that their offensive line could be problematic. And the blocking of the offensive line was not great. It required holding many times to not get Kirk Cousins hit, but the false starts, holding, another penalty on Oli Udoh where he committed a WWE wrestling move on someone. I mean, these were things that you normally would not expect, maybe outside of week one, but from an offensive line that had never played together outside of a handful of snaps in the preseason, that is sometimes what you come across. So the big question is, what do we take away from this loss for the Vikings, and where is this going to go? How can they fix the mistakes? Well, in part, the offensive line is set, and they go next week to face Arizona. They can be on the same page a little bit better, though, and not have your false starts, not have your holdings. But it looks like we're going to be talking about another year of, did Kirk Cousins get an opportunity to sit in the pocket and make throws the way that some other quarterbacks with better offensive lines do, and today was not one of those days. With that said, we also saw early in the game, Kirk Cousins was skittish because of it at times. He failed to find Justin Jefferson early in the game, as the Vikings really did a lot last year, and it wasn't until later in the game that he found Justin Jefferson on multiple big plays that made a big difference in the game. But it wasn't until the second half, it wasn't until they were down in the game where they were actually able to get the football to Justin Jefferson and get big plays from Justin Jefferson. So on Kirk Cousins' performance, Kirk Cousins was sort of the same way that he often is when his offensive line is struggling. That later, when there was less pressure, when Cincinnati's playing more conservative, he was able to take advantage. He did make some terrific throws at times, but he was also at the center in some ways of them getting down in the game. Not always. You can't blame Kirk Cousins for C.J. Ham jumping off sides twice. That was shocking for something like that to happen. This is also the first time that the Vikings are playing on the road with real crowd noise, not preseason crowd noise. But at the same time, they didn't move the ball effectively early in the game to give themselves a chance. And then as they go on later, the defense starts to wear down, and they allow Cincinnati, even though they were not converting too many third downs, even though they were having to punt, Cincinnati was able to run the football somewhat effectively with Joe Mixon. He went over 100 yards on the day, and Michael Pierce said after the game that I was brought here to stop the run, and we really didn't stop the run all that well. Now, speaking of the reaction to this game, pretty unequivocal across the board of this was week one, it's disappointing, it's frustrating, nobody wanted this, but they move on, and there are 17 games. The thing about this loss, though, is that next week they have to play Arizona. Arizona just played extremely well against Tennessee and got a huge win on the road. Chandler Jones got 5 sacks. Arizona got a big performance from Kyler Murray, who at some point looks like he could take a step forward. And so the next opponent just is coming off of a game that has them very confident going into the game. And also, the Vikings have to go on the road. They have to go to another different time zone and then play a defensive line that is very good. And this is where the concern would be, that a team with a lot of talent that made some great plays today. Harrison Smith had some big plays, a couple of sacks from Michael Pierce on the day, which he only had 3 in his career, and he got 2 today. So Michael Pierce immediately justifying what we all said, that he was going to be more of a pass rusher. Danielle Hunter gets a sack in his first game. And so in a lot of ways, individual pieces were working, but it sort of all comes back to, can you consistently move the ball on offense? Because the defense is, when they play good quarterbacks, not going to be perfect, and they were not perfect today against Joe Burrow. So it is not panic mode from the Minnesota Vikings. Nobody flipped the podium and said the season is done, we're all fired. But at the same time, they are behind the 8 ball early on in a division and an NFC that might be very close, and now with a stretch that could be very difficult for them. So from Paul Brown Stadium, Matthew Coller, Purple Insider. Listen to our longer conversation, the Purple Insider podcast, and read our reactions at purpleinsider.substack.com. Catch you next time.